Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And it's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Doug Kahl and Dominic McGough, executives at enVista. And today we're going to be talking about freight audit and payment, alive and kicking. And, freight audit and payment is one of those topics in transportation and logistics that, I like to say has kind of been in the shadows for a long time. It's historically not viewed as strategic, kind of a tactical, business process. But if you really start peeling back the onion and kind of look at it where it is today, you realize that it does play a very important role in supply chain logistics. And it's great to have Dominic and Doug here with us today to really, talk about why freight audit payment is not only alive and kicking, but also needs to come out of the shadows and really plays a very critical part of every company's transportation and logistics processes. Before we get started with the conversation, just want to remind all of you that are joining us live today that part of our goal here at Talking Logistics is to make this conversational. So as we're having our conversation, if you do have a question or a comment for Doug or Dominic, you can do so via the submit a question button or the chat feature. And I'll keep an eye on it. And certainly if it's an appropriate question and we've got time, I'll try to weave it into the conversation. And also a reminder, if you are joining us as a visitor today, you do have to sign up with Spreecast before you're able to ask a question. So at that, Doug and Dominic, welcome to the program.
Adrian, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here with you on Talking Logistics today.
Thanks very much. Nice to be here.
So Doug, let me start with you. Several years ago, as TMS software vendors, started introducing enhanced freight audit and payment capabilities, many analysts, including me, kind of predicted that shippers would, bring this outsourced logistics, process back in house. But to paraphrase Mark Twain's quote, "The news of freight audit and payments death has been greatly exaggerated," and in fact, demand for the service continues to grow. So, what's driving this ongoing growth, and where do we go wrong with our prediction?
Adrian, first, really sorry to disappoint you on that prediction. But I think, if you really take a look at the transportation life cycle and try to divide it into three buckets, we'll take a look at planning, execution, and settlement. The TMS platforms of today have certainly enhanced, the planning and the execution pieces. Some will even say that they address the audit and payment. So on the surface, your prediction and that of the other pundits would seem, at least conceptually, to be realistic. But we have when you consider the comprehensive, and accurate rating engines that most worthwhile TMS platforms have, then performing that audit piece, should also be within reach. To interface, with the company's financial package, take that, execution information out of a TMS, transfer it over to finance so that accounts payable can pay the carriers and the vendors. Again, the prediction all seemed realistic. But, when you take a look after a shipment is executed, whether it's a package or a pallet, a truckload, a container on an ocean vessel, as it starts moving from origin to destination, the carriers start making their adjustments. They start applying their accessorials more today than previously when that prediction first took place. And so often these charges are not captured in the TMS. And so when you account for them, you start auditing and confirming the accuracy of all these charges. Now we start getting into the validity of a solid freight audit and payment program. In addition, when we take and consider the value-added capabilities of a good system, one example is the GL coding and allocation. And while TMSs are great at executing a shipment, planning, optimizing, and executing that, you want to start getting into the financials and the GL allocation. That's really not the core competency of that type of system. And then, the next level is we take a look at most companies may have multiple systems and processes. Many ship parcel one way, execute truckload another. Then as we start taking a look at multiple divisions, and then taking a look at divisions across various companies, and add in the complexity of global trade management, we now have to try to reconcile a number of disparate data sources. We really need to take a look at having internal expertise to gather, consolidate, harmonize all that data. And again, that's probably something that's not in the wheelhouse of a TMS execution system, but can be and is a core competency of many solid freight audit and payment systems. So again, my apologies to you and the other pundits. You may have underestimated the difficulties that some of the companies face when trying to implement an enterprise-wide transportation system, potentially maybe a little bit overestimated the benefits of that one-size-fits-all approach. But the simple truth is this: there are economic values that come with having specialized transportation planning, execution, and settlement systems. Building all that into an overarching data warehouse for solid audit, planning, and sourcing.
Yeah, no, I will admit when my predictions are fall short of expectations. But kind of as a follow up, and that said, I mean, I have seen companies that have brought have implemented a TMS solution and brought freight audit and payment back in house, but in most cases they were predominantly, almost exclusively, truckload shippers, where arguably, the rating and the audit and the payment process is much more straightforward than, as you talked about, less than truckload, parcel, ocean shipping. And you already touched upon these a little bit. So, I mean, what is it exactly about those other modes that make it more complex? And is that complexity, again, I think you kind of touched upon it, is that complexity kind of why, companies continue to outsource the process?
Yeah, Adrian, I think the complexity certainly plays into that. I mean, let's look at just paying a freight bill. If we bring it back to its simplest form, paying a bill is not a difficult task. You receive it, you code it, you write a check to the vendor. But now let's make sure that we want to add some level of confirmation. Are we writing the check to the right vendor? We want to put in some sort of duplicate invoice protection to make sure that we're not paying the same bill twice. And then we get into the whole rating and auditing of the various charges. And let me give you one domestic example here. Let's take a small parcel. We start out with a small parcel contract and the carrier, how they arrive at their net rate. So you start with the base rate, subtract your discounts. Now you also need to consider the applicable accessorial charges, of which there are dozens of them. Let's not forget to apply the fuel surcharge and make sure that we properly account for which accessorial charges the fuel surcharge applies to from those that it does not. Let's keep in mind that fuel surcharge is going to change periodically, and you need to keep your system updated. So, trying to rate a shipment is a difficult enough task for the carrier, let alone few shippers have the tools or the capacity to accurately account and confirm for that type of rating. And that's just an example of a parcel shipment here domestically. There could be some examples and applications that apply globally, and maybe Dominic, you can address some of those.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. It really is. It's one of the differences is logistics is moving from the back of the warehouse, as we say, to the front of the warehouse, and the actual logistics personnel are grayer hairs now. And as a consequence, the experience to audit an invoice on an international transaction that can have FOB charges related to the shipment, the port-to-port or airport-to-airport charges, the arrival port charges, and the charges from the port of arrival to the final delivery point, in addition to that, duty and tax invoices, that really can end up with a complexity of a single shipment, possibly having 4, 5, even 6 consistent related invoices that are not duplicates, but are associated with the landed cost of that shipment. So it's really become an interesting industry in the global platform where, because of disparate ERP systems, a lot of the clients are using one true voice, and they're looking for a global voice that tells them what the cost of transactions are. And to do that, they're using Freight Audit and Pay to manage the big data and the large amounts of data that are associated with running a global operation that by necessity has different ERP systems in maybe 10, 15, or 20 different locations around the world. And in addition to that, maybe 10 or 15 different financial systems that were built to report to the local fiscal requirements of the country they operate in, not necessarily on a global platform.
No, obviously, so many different moving parts there, and obviously, when you bring in the international side, that adds yet another layer, of complexity there. And I think what I hear consistently from shippers, and it's actually surprising, is trying to get a handle on transportation spend management and kind of the challenges that many companies have to actually understand what their annual transportation spend is, globally. Across their organization because of all the different, modes that they use, all different systems that either whether it's ERP systems or TMS systems, that are involved in that whole process. And, I think you kind of shed some light there in terms of, that complexity and why many shippers struggle with that. Dominic, just kind of to continue on the international side here, enVista recently announced, the opening of an office there in the United Kingdom. And how is freight audit and payment process different in Europe than, let's say, compared to the United States? And is demand for the service growing there too? And are the driving forces the same?
I think the driving forces are similar, yes, and thank you. We're very excited at the opening of the office, and we're excited to be involved in freight payment that is really growing in Europe at a rapid rate. Part of that is because the requirement by either the corporate head office or indeed the financial people within the organization to identify what the freight costs are and how they impact their business. Within the freight industry, if we can make savings on $1 million of freight spend and we make a 10% saving, that goes straight onto the bottom line of a company's numbers. So there is internationally that impacts by the multiple currencies. It impacts by the multiple taxation requirements because in parts of Europe you pay VAT on the transportation costs, which can be as high as 20% of the total invoice value. Now that is reclaimable, providing you identify it and know what it is, but 20% on anyone's numbers is a big percentage. So we're seeing a growth in the requirement. We're seeing a growth in the industry. We have consistently worked with a number of large corporations, and you used a phrase there, Adrian, that really sparked in my mind, because a lot of the European clients don't call it freight audit and pay, they call it freight cost management. Doug, do you have anything to add?
No, Dominic, I think you've really covered in regards to the difference between what they may see over in Europe versus what we see here in the States. Adrian, it's also making sure that you keep the compliance and keep track of that data, for the length of time that you need to. So having a single source that can gather various data pieces, being able to consolidate it, being able to save it, so that you can have access to it for compliance purposes, and that's not just, months, that's usually measured in years. Making sure that that is there for everyone is, an additional value add that a solid audit and payment or a spend management program, as Dominic put, can provide to a shipper.
Now, I'm kind of curious, and maybe Dominic, I'll start this one with you as well. Are there any differences between kind of large and small companies when it comes to outsourcing freight audit and payment? I mean, generally speaking, any kind of logistics outsourcing has tended to be kind of the large companies that have gravitated toward that. But I'm wondering if, in your experience, and Doug, you could also comment after Dominic, if there are any differences in kind of the driving forces or the capabilities or what they're looking for between small and large companies.
There are differences in distinctly, and obviously it's sometimes it's easier to onboard a smaller company because they're more receptive and have less practices that are in place. But equally, because of the fiscal requirements, even if they are a large multinational corporation, we would look to implement them on a country by country and a fiscal location basis. So even the big boys end up being sliced into fiscal units, because that, from a taxation point of view, and indeed from a language and currency point of view, allows us to handle this data. So although it's a large program for some of our larger corporations, we can and do end up with 18 fiscal locations in Europe, speaking possibly up to 18 different languages, and also being involved with maybe anywhere between 5 to 7 unique currencies and unique VAT regimes. So to answer your question, the large companies are looking at this from a data management point of view on I would say, a regional basis, i.e. North America, EMEA, APAC, and then Latin America. And the smaller companies typically are coming to us with, I have a number of locations around the globe. I may have them in one particular region, and I just want visibility to my spend so that I can be in a position to react quickly to market changes, quickly to Asia rate increases, quickly to fuel surcharges that are impacting. So that's where we really see it happening. And some of the differences are the agility that the small companies have is now really being searched for by the big companies.
Sure. Adrian, to add to that, I think when I hear largest versus small, the first thing that comes to mind is the different level of logistics network complexity. The number and amount of inbound vendor management, your distribution network nodes and origin ship points, the variety of modes that you may use, number of service providers, the various service levels within each provider, and then all that systems integration. But in addition to being large versus small, I think there is another overall driving factor, and that is this. The speed of business has just gotten to be so fast today. And it's very evident in many companies. And companies are approaching this very differently. Some are very resistant to this change. Some embrace it and look to leverage it. Some are simply in a panic reaction type of mode. But with the speed of business, folks need to and have the desire to have ready access to reliable information from which they can make decisions very, very quickly that they need to do in order to compete in business today. And having, again, that consolidated data warehouse, reliable information, readily available, helps businesses better compete at the speed they need to today.
I agree 100%. I mean, and I've written and talked about this, this year when I'm often asked, what's the biggest challenge, facing supply chain logistics executives today? Obviously some of the specifics vary by industry, but the common thread that I hear from executives is, managing change. And not only, change has always been the constant, right? In supply chain logistics, exceptions are always happening. But today, really what's changed is the rapid pace of change. So, for a lot of companies, keeping up with that rapid pace is from a technology standpoint, from a process standpoint, a decision-making standpoint, it has presented some difficulties. So, in terms of being able to, the phrase that you hear a lot these days is being able to make smarter decisions faster. And there's a lot that goes into, enabling, that capability. So to that point, in terms of comparing kind of today to kind of the past, and Dominic, maybe I'll start with you on this one. I mean, what's different about freight order and payment process today to compare to, say, 10 years ago? In other words, have customer expectations changed, and if so, in what ways?
I think for me, yes. I think the customer expectation is now that they require more information from the freight bill than they ever did in the past. Obviously, details of the origin and destination and the services, but we've got customers who are looking at really driving down into the product information relating to the shipment. They're looking at driving down into the pickup times and pickup dates. They're looking at the carrier mix. They're looking at their global spends. And those were things that traditionally, as Doug and I talked about earlier, processing a freight bill was pretty simple processing a bill. Now we're talking about the data mining that we capture on an individual freight bill becoming part of the process. So the actual auditing of the bill is part of what we do, but the data mining is becoming equally as important in how we manage the expectation. So from 10 years ago, that wasn't quite the driver that it is now. Now in today's climate, because people want to make reactions and need to make decisions even quicker than they have in the past, they're looking for that freight audit payment data instantly. At the 3 days at month end, quarter end, year end. They're also looking for instant data in terms of when you receive the bill. Have you audited the bill? Is it clear? Is it ready? Can it create an accrual? So the pressures on the freight audit are becoming vast, and we're moving forward with that. So I think, Doug, you're probably seeing a similar process, but the days of someone sitting with an Excel spreadsheet and a green pen, I think, are long gone.
No, you're right, Dominic. And when I see someone sitting with an Excel spreadsheet and a green pen, it's a great prospect for me. But you also talked, Adrian, there's that old saying in real estate, the three most important things are location, location, location. To take what Dominic said about having, access to product knowledge, product information, to carrier spend information, to service performance. From where it was 10 years ago to where it is today, the three most important things are visibility, visibility, and visibility. In making sure that data is available 24/7, that it can be delivered to you no matter where you are, pushing it out through the various tools that people have and use today, tablets and smartphones, and adapting that information, not so it's just a computer or laptop based, but so it is visible and readable and accessible via something as small as a smartphone. Secondly is the ability to convert numerics into visuals. A lot of dashboard enhancements are going on. I see that as a growing trend. Going back to that speed of business, to be able to take data, consolidate it, synthesize it, and put it into an output that people can quickly see, and with the snap of a finger, make a knowledgeable, reliable decision. And then, of course, next is also being able to obtain a true, reliable, total landed cost. And then, again, having a platform that can integrate back into one's own systems. So freight audit and payment data needs to be compatible with the TMS that we took a shot at in our first question. Also with WMS, ERP, and financial systems. So, this is becoming almost as much of a systems development data integration situation as it is just taking that invoice and be able to read it, code it, and pay it.
Yeah, to paraphrase here a little bit, as I listen to both of you, it strikes me that this is really a key enabler of business intelligence and analytics in transportation, right? So there's so much buzz these days around big data, right? And how do you convert big data into actionable insights and then ultimately derive business value from that. And obviously there's so much data, information, and insights that can be gathered from freight audit and payment data. So it sounds to me that really kind of what's different today than kind of 10 years ago is, this desire, need, and demand to really mine. I think that Dominic, you used that word, really mine, the data that's coming out of, from a freight audit and payment standpoint to really derive some, insights that can then lead transportation logistics executives to, drive continuous improvement, and make some, process changes where need be, and again, keep up with whatever changes occur in the marketplace, whether they're competitive changes, cost changes, regulatory changes, and so forth. So, it strikes me that that's kind of the big difference between today and a few years back. We're running a little bit short on time here. I've got a couple of questions to ask. So I just want to remind those of you that are joining us that if you do have a question or comment for Doug or Dominic, now would be the time to ask it. So Doug, let me continue with you, and taking those customer expectations, into consideration. What attributes should a shipper look for in a service provider?
Yeah, I think we're here to talk about audit and payment. So let me separate those two for a second, Adrian. With audit, it's one thing to be able to rate and audit a freight charge, but as we talked about earlier, with the complexities of pricing across various modes, it's also important to ensure that an audit provider's rating tools can address all the complexities and aspects of pricing with each and every individual mode, and not just with every individual mode, but be able to do it with every shipment. That varies from a lot of shippers who will do their audit on more or less a random sample type basis, and just don't have the time, complexity, wherewithal, or resources available to audit each individual shipment. They're just looking for a trend. And also, a good audit provider should have a means to communicate exceptions to a carrier and to be able to stay with it through the exception process, communicating back and forth with the carrier to reach a resolution agreement of what that charge should be. As for the payment aspect, recognition of authorized vendors to be able to verify what carriers should be paid, should be in the system and eligible to receive payment of a shipper's money. To make sure that a shipper's funds are distinct and secure accounts, that they are not commingled with any other client's money. Thirdly, to make sure that there's limited access to the account. The fewer hands that are in it, likely the more secure those funds will be. And the final point here would be to separate the individuals involved in receipt of the funds from those that conduct disbursement of the monies out to the carriers. So in taking a look at audit and payment, those are a few points that I would encourage shippers to keep in mind. Dominic, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage the customers to look for where the carriers are and where the freight payment companies are based. I'd look at what their local infrastructure is, and I'd look at the languages and the coverage that they have. They need to be able to communicate with carriers in a language other than English. We're blessed in that it's our natural language, but when you're dealing with multiple parts of Europe and Asia, and you're dealing with some of the accounts clerks and some of the accounts receivable people, it's beneficial if you would make the effort to communicate with them in French, German, Italian, Spanish, Ukrainian, Russian, Malaysian, Chinese, so they feel the process. And that's something I think that, when you look at the shiny office in America, that's one thing. But what's the structure and infrastructure around the globe that supports that operation so that A, your locations, and B, your carriers around the globe receive the same standards of service wherever they be?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. When again, it goes back to those unique considerations that companies need to think about, particularly if they're looking at this from a global perspective and not just a U.S. Perspective. So, as a way to wrap up, and Dominic, I'll start with you, and then Doug, you can add your thoughts on this question as well. I mean, what questions should shipper ask themselves to assess whether their freight audit and payment capabilities, whether they're doing this in-house or they're outsourcing it, is best in class or needs improvement?
Yeah, I think that they need to ask themselves, there are specialists in modes of transport. They need to ask themselves what the freight payment company that's presenting themselves, what modes of transport do they work with, and can they work with all modes? Not all freight payment companies can. They need to also ask themselves, what's the global management structure, and how can I get the level of service across the whole range of activities? And in addition to that, they need to ask, what is the stability of the company I'm dealing with? And from a perspective of, can I do business with these companies? And are these companies profitable? Because are they making the investments in the technology that's going to take me to the next level? Doug?
All right, thanks, Dominic. Adrian, I think for companies to look at it and determine, you say best in class. the audit payment application is the end. Start with taking a look and ask yourself, how simple or complex is my overall transportation logistics network? Freight mode, parcel mode, multiple mode, domestic and international. You take a look at your inbound as well as your outbound, your vendor compliance as well as your customer returns. Take the holistic approach of trying to determine how simple or complex that is. Next, consider the number of carriers you have, the contracts that you have with these carriers, how complex is each one of the individual pricing terms and concessions that you have from all of them. Now, let's not forget to be real here. There's going to be that maverick spend that is out there, and how do shippers account for that non-contracted service? Because that's likely going to be very paper and very manual process intensive, not efficient at all, but it is out there, it exists, and you need to be able to pull that into your process. And then consider the platforms that you have. How many systems are spread across the various divisions, multiple countries around the globe that you're doing business in? How do you integrate all those systems? Your order, your warehouse, your transportation, and your financial systems. And building that type of integration into your planning so that you have solid sourcing data available to do a better job of working with your vendors of choice, that your execution, including optimization, is there for you to control those costs, and that your settlement is in place to make sure the right carrier gets paid the right amount at the right time, every time, and provides you a data warehouse to pull reporting and to do network planning and optimization. So the last point in regards to being a best in class, it's not just auditing and paying a freight bill, but this is getting to be more and more of a systems development and integration play as much as a financial one. So that I think that just about covers everything I had for you, Adrian.
That last point is great. I think that's a great insight in terms of the importance of integration in all of this, right? So it's the integration of business processes, the integration of systems, to really bring out the business value that we've talked about, today. Like every week, we manage to, just scratch the surface here on this topic. But, hopefully those of you that kind of attended today or watching this on demand, if there's one takeaway is that hopefully you'll see that, freight audit payment is coming out of the shadows and needs to come out of the shadows because it does play and has the potential to play a more strategic and important role in the day-to-day processes of supply chain logistics executives in terms of driving continuous improvement and business value. Doug and Dominic, thank you both for making the time for being here with us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Adrian. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great, and we'll certainly look forward to. Maybe I'll shy away from making a prediction at this point, but maybe in the next couple of days I'll make a prediction, and then we'll have you back in a year or so and see if my prediction came true or not. We didn't get any live questions today, but if you are watching this program on demand and you do have a question for Doug and Dominic, you can do so by finding the episode at talkinglogistics.com. And you can post your question or comment there, and I'm sure Doug and Dominic will be more than happy to respond via that platform. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.
Thank you.